Many Pokemon abilities have seen buffs and nerfs throughout the generations. Some were too strong, while others were shown some much needed love. Today we're going to look at the abilities that received direct buffs and how they affected them competitively. So I won't be including abilities with indirect buffs like Infiltrator that became more useful with the addition of Aurora Veil. There are some very minor buffs we are going to talk about at the end of the video as well, so stick around and let me know any that you weren't familiar with. Our first ability buffs come at the expense of another ability. These are the abilities Oblivious, Own Tempo, Scrappy, Inner Focus, and Rattled. While these abilities all have different effects, they were all buffed to help balance an ability seen as a bit overpowered, this being Intimidate. Oblivious, Own Tempo, Scrappy, and Inner Focus, in addition to their regular effects, were buffed to block the Intimidate attack drop in Generation 8, while Rattled will now activate when intimidated to give the user a speed boost. Additionally, Oblivious didn't use to prevent Taunt in Generations 3 to 5, with that effect being added in Generation 6. So this ability actually had two buffs over different generations to turn it into a pretty worthwhile ability on some mons. Notably, Mamoswine will often use it over the Great Thick Fat. Scrappy is already a solid ability many fighting and normal types use, so this buff does nothing but help the physical attackers like Mega Lopunny, Kangaskhan, Sirfetch'd, and more. Inner Focus isn't the greatest ability in singles, but has its uses in doubles to prevent fake-out flinching. The buff helps a few mons for sure, and can sway them to use it over potentially using their other abilities. Own Tempo isn't a commonly seen ability, as confusion isn't that huge of a factor to consider competitively, especially after its nerf, so it at least gets some more niche use with this buff. Rattled is another rarely seen ability. It's on a lot of unevolved mons, or mons that have access to way better abilities. The buff is fine, it definitely makes it more likely to activate in a battle, but you are still receiving the Intimidate attack drop, which may not influence you to choose this ability over better alternatives. The next ability to cover is one that has been both buffed and nerfed. We'll just be going over the buffs though, as I'm thinking of making a follow-up video on the nerfed abilities. Let me know if that would tickle your fancy to watch. The ability is Effect Spore. This ability can activate when the user is hit by a contact move. It inflicts sleep, poison, or paralysis to the attacking mon. In Generation 3, there was just a puny 10% chance for it to activate, with a 3.3% chance of each status. Not very reliable to say the least. But come Generation 4, this was bumped up to 30%, making it a lot more useful. These statuses now each had 10% chances to proc. From Generation 5 on, it has been slightly changed to favor sleep more and poison less, which is a slight buff I guess, as more Pokemon are able to be put to sleep than be poisoned, so it is worth a mention even though it's only 1%. Usually, Pokemon with this ability will have better abilities to use, but there are few mons that can take advantage of Effect Spore to punish contact moves. Onto an actual bigger buff, we have Sturdy. Everyone knows how Sturdy prevents you from being one-shot if you're at full HP, but it didn't always have that effect. Initially in Generations 3 and 4, Sturdy only blocked OHKO moves. You know, Sheer Cold, Guillotine, Fissure, and Horn Drill. Moves you wouldn't really come across in competitive play. It wasn't a great ability at all, but the buff it received in Generation 5 made it act like a Focus Sash. As long as you are at max HP, you cannot be knocked out by a single hit. This is actually better than a Sash, as Sturdy doesn't get consumed and can activate multiple times a battle. So you can use healing moves and items to get Sturdy again. This was a huge buff, as many Sturdy users have 4 times weaknesses to common attacking types and now can almost guarantee some value. It's a great insurance ability against setup sweepers and is also very useful for your own setup. Plus, who doesn't love a Sturdy proc into a surprise Custap Berry? Rough Skin and Iron Barbs are effectively the same ability. They inflict damage to a foe when hit with a contact move. They have always done this, but from Generations 3 to 4, they received a pretty solid buff. Initially, Pokemon making contact would receive 1/16 of their max HP and damage, but this was increased up to 1/8. This makes these abilities far more useful to punish physical attackers. You get double the value as you did before, and combined with a Rocky Helmet, oh mama, you are inflicting serious damage and punishing physical attackers hard. It is a seemingly small buff at first glance, but it really helps mons like Garchomp, Druddigon, and Ferrothorn run effective defensive sets, and is probably the best counter against multi-strike moves, as each hit will proc this ability. It's time to shift our focus over to a couple offensive abilities. The first is already a well-established, great ability, Normalize. While Normalize isn't seen as a good competitive ability by any means, it was a lot worse from generations 4 to 6. It turns all the Pokemon's moves into the normal type, and that's it. This gives every move a stat bonus, while also removing any type coverage. It is a pretty bad ability, only having a couple gimmicks that can make it more useful than having no ability at all. Luckily, in Generation 7, this ability was buffed a bit by adding a 20% power boost to normal type moves used by normalized Pokemon. This works out to just be a 20% power boost on every move except a select few. While it still doesn't make Delcatty anywhere near good, it's at least hitting 20% harder than it used to be. A better offensive ability that got buffed is Weak Armor. Introduced in Generation 5, this ability decreased the user's defense by 1 stage if hit by a physical move, while increasing its speed stat by 1 stage as well. It could be useful as a speed boost combined with a setup move can potentially start a sweep, or at least grab some extra damage, but the vast majority of mons with this ability at the time were pretty slow. In Generation 7, Weak Armor was buffed to raise a user's speed by 2 stages. This is a huge change, as you will have a lot more outspeeds with the extra stage. You can run different natures and EV spreads, counting for the 2 stage boost, making you stronger or tankier. Slow Shell Smash mons appreciate this greatly. Same goes to hazard setters who want to place an extra layer of hazards before feigning. It also gives an extra power boost to Stored Power, which is seen on mons like Poltegeist and Armor Rouge. Overall, this buff made a huge difference competitively, and I'd like to see some more underwhelming abilities get this sort of treatment. More! Onto an ability you might not even know had an in-battle effect. We have Pickup. In Generations 3 and 4, that would be correct, as it only served to pick up items after a battle in-game. You could farm useful in-game items with your pack of Zigzagoon, including rare candies, leftovers, and heart scales, but what you may have not known is Pickup actually has a competitive effect and has since Generation 5. If a Pokemon with the Pickup ability is not currently holding an item, and another Pokemon uses a one-time use item, the mon with Pickup will take that item at the end of the turn. This includes items used by Fling or Natural Gift as well, so Consume Berries, Weakness Policy, Throat Spray, Terrain Seeds, you name it, they can be yoinked after usage. The probability that you get a useful item isn't the highest, but it should be noted that you will prevent opposing Pokemon from being able to access those items for the rest of the battle. A Harvest user that can keep spamming citrus berries will no longer harvest them if their berry is picked up. Same goes for Recycle users. Recycle will fail if their consumed item has been picked up. Pickup won't just pick up a consumed item anytime though. It has to be on the same turn it was used, or else it will be lost and unable to be claimed. I don't think you would ever see this used competitively, since a few viable Pokemon competitively really need their other abilities in order to do well, but it is cool to see it has an effect in battle that could potentially be useful. Now let's buff other abilities with no effect to actually do something. While we're on the topic of unused abilities that seen small buffs, we will quickly go over the abilities Keen Eye and Illuminate. Keen Eye has always had an in-battle effect. It prevents other Pokemon from lowering their accuracy stat. Pretty bland ability if I'm being honest. In Generation 6, it received a pretty small but potentially useful buff. Keen Eye, in addition to its regular effect, will now also ignore the target's evasiveness stat. This means you can set up free minimizes, and a Keen Eye user will hit at the same accuracy. A 100% accurate move will always hit. This isn't the same as No Guard, however, as Keen Eye Pokemon can still miss moves like Hurricane that have a lower accuracy. It just will never go lower than that. Illuminate is a pretty trash ability, having no battle effect, while having the effect of increasing encounter rates of wild Pokemon if the user is first in the party. It finally received an in-battle effect in Generation 9 to work just like Keen Eye. Illuminate ignores evasion changes and prevents the user's accuracy stat from being lower. I mean, it's better than nothing I guess, but I think we would all have preferred something like an accuracy buff, even if it was just small like Victory Star. This could have at least made Starmie's Hydro Pump more accurate and let it more reliably use moves like Thunder Wave, Meteor Beam, Blizzard, and Thunder. Like, there's actually a solid chance the Starmie line would use this ability if it just acted like the item Wide Lens. Two abilities that received huge buffs are Lightning Rod and Storm Drain. These abilities function identically, but just interact with electric and water type moves respectively. Originally, these moves just redirected electric and water type moves to hit the user instead of its ally. Somewhat useful, and at least could protect allies from strong attacks, but when Generation 5 rolled around, that's when these abilities became truly great. Electric and water type moves not only get drawn in by these abilities, they also now provide a full immunity to these attacks. And to top it all off, they will also raise the user's special attack stat by 1 stage. Not only making it a great support ability in doubles, but a great ability to use in singles as well. You use it as a defensive ability and can turn it into an offensive one with the stat increase. This has led to great use in both singles and doubles competitive formats, as abilities that give immunities are super valuable. There are a bunch of strategies that can synergize with these abilities, like self-procting them in doubles with moves that hit all Pokemon on the field. Overall, a massive buff competitively. Overcoat is an ability that has seen a seemingly small buff, but one that makes it a lot more useful than it was. Originally, when released in Generation 5, Overcoat just blocked damage from weather, so Sandstorm and Hail wouldn't pelt users at the end of each turn. Definitely a solid ability to have in this generation, as permanent weather was still a thing. Come Generation 6, permanent weather ended, and this ability probably would have been very underwhelming. But Overcoat received a buff of protecting the user against Powder and Spore moves, along with blocking the ability Effect Spore from activating against it. This means you can't be put to sleep by Spore or Sleep Powder, can't be status by Stun Spore or Poison Powder, and ignore redirection attempts from Rage Powder, among a few other not commonly seen moves. A solid buff considering it gives the same effect as the item's Safety Goggles, in addition to blocking weather damage. With Hail converting to Snow now, and no longer dealing residual damage, this ability is a good deal less useful, especially when you look at the users. Fortress, Escavalier, Revavroom, and Wormadam Sandy and Trash forms are all immune to Sandstorm damage by virtue of their typing, so they just benefit from the Spore and Powder move protection. Without it, the ability would actually just be useless, unless they had their types changed. The Leavanny line along with Wormadam Plant already have Powder and Spore immunities as grass type Pokemon, leaving them just with an immunity to Sandstorm damage as their ability. So there's a lot less reason to use this ability on most of the Pokemon with access to it. Now I have a few abilities that received very minor buffs, but I still want to mention them. Before I do though, do me a favor and body slam that sub button to become a bud. And if you want to see a follow-up video covering all the nerfed abilities, make sure to hit that like button. When I was looking through all the abilities, I found some that I wasn't entirely sure if I should include because the buffs were so minor. But I figured I would include a few of them quickly because there are some interesting situations competitively they might come into play. The ability Flash Fire provides an immunity to fire type moves, and if hit by one, it will increase the power of the user's fire type moves by 50%. Initially, this didn't work while the user was frozen, and didn't activate when hit by Will-O-Wisp. These mechanics were changed starting in Generation 4, with Will-O-Wisp activating Flash Fire, and in Generation 5, being able to function if the user is frozen. The ability Synchronize will activate when the user is poisoned, burned, or paralyzed. It will inflict the Pokemon who caused the status ailment to also receive that status. In Generations 3 and 4, if a Pokemon was badly poisoned, it would only pass on a regular poison. But come Generation 5, if badly poisoned, a synchronized user will now pass on that badly poisoned status condition instead of regular poisoning. Now we just need to buff it to pass on freeze, sleep, and confusion, and this ability will be a lot more valuable. Did you know the Hustle ability had a bug in Generation 3 games? Well, I didn't, as it seems like it was just recently discovered. In addition to lowering the accuracy of physical attacks by 20% in exchange for a 50% power boost, Hustle apparently used to also lower the accuracy of targeting status moves with types that were physical. It would just check if the move was a physical type and lower the accuracy regardless if it was an attack or a status move. This was fixed in Generation 4, with status moves no longer being affected. And there is an actual small buff here still, don't worry. In Generation 4, Hustle increased confusion damage, but from Generation 5 onwards, it no longer affects confusion damage. So a little bit of a nerf, then buff action going on here. Plus and Minus were also slightly buffed. These terrible abilities used to be even worse than they are now, as to get the 50% special attack boost they bring, you had to pair a Pokemon with the ability Plus with one with the ability Minus. From Generation 5 on, these abilities will be in effect if there are 2 Pokemon with Plus or 2 with Minus, so you can mix and match your bad abilities to get them to work. The ability Frisk allows the user to check the foe's held item.
What is in your pocket?
In Generations 4 and 5, this would randomly select an unidentified opponent in double or triple battles and reveal their held item. It received a small buff in Generation 6 to reveal the items of all opposing Pokemon, which is a lot more useful even though this ability is pretty disappointing and underwhelming. And the last small buff to cover is for the ability Download. Download is a fun ability that raises the user's attack or special attack stat by 1 stage, depending on the foe's lowest defensive stat at the time. In Generation 4, a download boost could actually be blocked by having a substitute up. The ability just wouldn't activate. In Generation 5, this was changed, and download will activate if switched in on a Pokemon that has a substitute up. It could be the difference maker in breaking a Pokemon's sub and taking it out, so a decent competitive buff. What ability changes do you think had the biggest impact competitively? Let me know in the comment section. And if you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to become a bud and hit that sub. Check out this video next if you enjoy competitive Pokemon content. Take it easy, buds.